All right, we're gonna get started now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. My name is Tracy Paul. Today, we on the DE&I Inclusion Task Force for New York State Chapter of ACC, we're going to be talking about how to create an impactful CV. And so the intended audience for this talk, definitely trainees and also like early career and even mid-career faculty as well. Next slide, please. So the objectives of today is really to understand the differences between a CV and a resume, to learn the key information needed in a CV and how to appropriately document it, and to recognize how to adapt one's CV for the intended audience. And just for the format of this next hour, I'm briefly going to go through a few slides, and then we're going to have our esteemed panel field any questions from the audience, and also, giving their perspectives as cardiologists who have been involved in interviewing trainees for fellowship positions and also interviewing fellows for faculty positions as well. So next slide, please. So just want to introduce the panelists before we start. So first we have Dr. Phillips from NYU. He's an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Cardiology. He serves as the director of nuclear cardiology, the medical director of outpatient cardiology, and he is the senior associate program director of the training program in cardiovascular diseases at NYU, and also last year's recipient of the Department of Medicine's Clinical Mentor of the Year. And he actually currently serves as the chair of the Innovations Committee of the New York ACC chapter. Next, I have Dr. Ranjan. She is an advanced cardiac imager from Westchester Medical Center and an assistant professor of medicine at the New York Medical College up in Valhalla. She serves as the director of the cardiac CT section. She's also the associate director of advanced cardiac imaging and associate program director of the General Cardiology Fellowship. And then next I have Dr. Lyubarova, who's coming from Albany Med Health System. Dr. Lyubarova is a general non-invasive cardiologist and associate professor of medicine at Albany Medical College as well. And her clinical and research focus involves cardiac imaging, heart disease in women and older adults. She also has a particular interest in women's heart health, geriatric cardiology, and coronary heart disease management in different patient populations. And she's been very involved with the DEI task force over the last couple of years. And then next is myself. I'm the moderator. I am Tracy Paul. I'm a cardiologist by training. I currently am full-time at Merck Research Laboratories, serving as a senior medical director in the cardiovascular therapeutic area. I also maintain an adjunct faculty position at Weill Cornell Medicine. And then last but not least is Dr. Krishnan. He's an assistant professor of medicine in the Division of Cardiology at Weill Cornell. He's a specialist in advanced heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, and transplant cardiology. He serves as director of the Cardiopulmonary Exercise Lab and is the assistant director of the Pulmonary Hypertension Program. So thank you to all our panelists for taking this time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so first things first, like what is a CV? And so CV stands for Curriculum Vitae, and really it's a brief account of your education, your qualifications, and your previous experiences. And it's typically sent with a job application. When we talk about CV in the academic medicine concept, it's really a list of like everything you've done, and usually starting with significant experiences from medical school onwards, although like specific undergrad experiences, especially if like you worked in a lab, if you did a lot of major work during college, even if you had done so during high school, that can also be included in a CV. And it really is a full history of your academic accomplishments. Whereas with a resume, it's really a concise summary of your qualifications, with resumes typically being, I mean, the old adage is like the younger you are, it shouldn't be more than one page. But nowadays, it's pretty common to see resumes that are 2 pages or more. And for those who are applying for jobs, usually it is at least 2 pages. Next slide, please. So what are the sections of a CV? So I'm sure most of you, if you're with an academic organization, there probably is a template that your academic organization has, like your institution, your medical school, and their specific format. But in general, a CV will include like your contact information, your education, usually bachelor's degree and higher, Sometimes, depending on like if you went to a very like nationally known like high school, people will include that as well. And also other educational experiences, like if you got like a certificate in certification for clinical research, or had spent a significant portion of time like in a summer program learning additional like skills like health policy or whatnot, that's something that you would include. And then also your postdoctoral training. So where'd you go for residency? Where'd you complete your fellowship? If you took any like special, like, like sometimes fellows will rotate at different institutions to have exposure to like, specialty interests, that can be included there. And then, for those who are early career, so, what are your academic appointments? Which hospitals do you have credentials in? And what other like professional positions and other like means of employment, like if you took a gap year and you spent it working in a lab, that would go there as well. And then lastly, on the other side is just like a laundry list of basically your whole like academic and like career life. So licensure, are you board certified or are you board eligible? Leadership roles in different organizations, so like professional orgs, if you work with patient advocacy groups. And then also very important, like your honors and awards, like, were you named like resident of the month? Like that can be included in your CV. Were you awarded something from a community service organization that you spent time with? Those sorts of things. And then, what professional orgs are you a member of? Are you a member of the ACC? Are you a member of AHA, ESC? Those sorts of things. And then like educational contributions, like, this is a section that's growing, but if you've made significant contribution to the curriculum of like your residency program or your fellowship, like if you started up like a rotation for residents to learn some cardiac CT, that would be something that can go on your CV. And then research grants, have you submitted for a grant for research? Were you awarded one? Have you won like any scholarships? Those sorts of things. And then lastly, of course, like peer-reviewed publications. So not only what has been published, but also what's been submitted, what's in review, those sorts of things, and your abstracts. And then lastly, like media, more and more, those of us in the healthcare sector, we're being asked for our opinion in articles. Some of us are going on TV. Those sorts of things would be included in that section. Next slide, please. And so overall, these are some general tips for when you're creating your CV. Really, it should be clean and professional format. And so I've seen a lot of CVs over the years, and some like stand out, not just necessarily because of the content, but because of the way they were formatted. What I remember about them is not the person, but that they had like some quirky format or some quirky font. So that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Like you want your CV to stay in someone's mind based on like what's written on the paper, not because like you have this like digital one where you click and this happens and whatnot. So try to like, since this is medicine and we're not as like we're not necessarily a creative field, like leave that creativity for something else in some other aspect and convey it in a different way in your interview. But like the CV is really, it's to convey what it is about you. And so you don't necessarily want to be using like fonts and like a very like individualized format that people are not familiar with. Also, really have to customize your CV for each application. For trainees who are applying for like residency or fellowship or whatnot, that doesn't necessarily apply because like you're creating the CV to give to your letter writers, and you're using the CV to generate the information that you need for the actual application on ERAS. But like when you are applying for your first attending job, you do want to tailor your CV to the job application, meaning if you're a non-invasive and you're applying to a job where you're mostly going to be reading echo and doing some cardiac CT, it may not be, you want to put those experiences, like highlight those well, and not necessarily you spending time, like extra time on like, advanced cardiac support service. Also for those who are applying for jobs, like coming out of fellowship, consider if you want to start on your CV, if you want to write like a brief professional summary. And so more and more trends have been showing that instead of like doing the traditional like cover letter and a CV, sometimes people will write like a brief, like 4 to 5 sentence paragraph, just really describing, who they are, what their skill set is, and what their interests are. to kind of give them like a nice little picture of like who you are as an applicant. And then, honestly, like when writing the descriptions, use action verbs. Like you conducted XYZ experiment. You managed a team of 5 trainees. You started XYZ, so those sorts of things. And then very importantly, spell check. Like, so proper grammar and proper spelling really reflect attention to detail. Apologies if there are any grammatical or spelling errors in this slide deck. But for your CV, like you need to be double checking and triple checking that, because you don't want that to be so obvious. Like you don't want people to think their first impression of you is, oh, wow, this person can't even like proofread their CV. This is my first impression of them. And then also lastly, now that we're in this age of AI, really human eyes and ears check, right? Like I'm sure people have seen that their AI services, their AI can be used to like help with writing a CV. And I'm not saying that not to use it if you need like summarize some key parts, but really like go through it and make sure that this document reflects like you and like how you speak and whatnot, and that it sounds like an actual live person wrote it. Next slide, please. And then also tips for keeping your CV up to date. So this part can be actually a little hard. As we get older, we have done so much, right? Those of us in medicine, and some tips along the way to make sure that you keep your CV up to date is, start saving the emails that are documenting recent achievements. Like if you get an email saying like, hey, you were funded X amount internal grant, keep that either in your in basket in Outlook or in a file folder on your personal computer. You should also strive to set aside time once a month to quickly add any new positions or roles or responsibilities or awards or publications that may have come through in that month. And then, once a quarter, you should really try to set aside some time on your calendar, maybe at least like 30 minutes, to really review your CV more in depth. Like make sure your CV is reflecting like where your career journey is going. And also you use that 30 minutes to reflect on like, what are your accomplishments this quarter, and like where do you see yourself going for the next one, and like long term as well. Also, you want to seek feedback from your mentors and your peers. Sometimes like after we've spent a lot of time on a document, we may not be able to kind of step away and really see like how it gels together. So it's a good idea to get feedback at times. And then, think of your CV as a living document. So you can continue like adding things to it, but you can always edit it down. And this kind of goes back to what I said before, where you want to tailor your CV for the position that you're applying for. Yeah. So like if you're a person who you're doing a lot of, let's say like possible like media work, like people are coming asking your opinions about like certain topics in cardiology, then yeah, you'll have an extensive media portion. But like, let's say then you're applying for a research grant, you may not want to include every little soundbite that you have written in publication. You may edit it down to just the most important ones, but always like have like a master file with everything, and then you can pick and pull as needed. And some people have even gone as far where they'll like label certain, like have certain documents of their CV and be like, this is my CV for like research opportunities. This is my CV for potential like job positions. This is my CV cataloging like my educational achievements. So that's a possibility as well. Next slide, please. And then lastly, given that, a lot of trainees are here and that those who are listening to this recording probably are in training as well, really need to think about how do you translate this CV into an ERAS application. And so you really need to understand that there are different sections for ERAS, and you need to input your information accurately, even understanding like, what is the name of your program? So that is something that has come up in the past, like when people are like filtering like applicants and to applications to review them, make sure that you're writing in your residency program correctly. Don't use an abbreviation. Especially in like New York, where a lot of the academic centers have like multiple different affiliate hospitals, you want to make sure that the appropriate hospital, your program is written correctly. Also, you want to summarize your experiences and achievements clearly, like really avoid abbreviations, because it may be common to you, it may be common to your mentors in your hospital, but that may be a very hospital specific abbreviation or med school specific abbreviation. So assume that those who are reading your applications are very unfamiliar with the activity, so you need to describe it appropriately. And then also prioritize the relevant information, but you don't need to self-edit too much. Meaning, if you've had like pretty significant experiences that pertain to medicine, pertain to cardiology in like undergrad, you can include them. You can include relevant, impactful activities in medical school. It doesn't have to just reflect, like for those applying for fellowship, just what you did in residency. And also you want to quantify your achievements. Like if you were in such and such lab or like clinical research group, you can then say submitted like 2 abstracts or wrote 3 manuscripts or whatnot, and just really like put a number to what it is. And then, give context for the roles that you've held. Like if you've been named like, like a vice president or like associate director, like what does that really entail? And then make sure you cite your publications correctly using accepted like citation style that ERAS, I can't remember off the top of my head if they actually state it, but I think there is direction to how to do it, because when ERAS prints out the application and committee members are reviewing it, it's pretty standardized. And then you also want to cite significant oral presentations. Like if you had like a residence research day and your abstract was selected for an oral presentation, that's something that you would add to your application. And then I include a professional headshot, and I put professional in quotes because like the smartphones of today they're pretty good actually. But you want a headshot where it's like you're dressed in professional wear, ideally on like a solid background, looking at the camera and just looking your best. Because as someone who reviewed a lot of ERAS applications, a lot of your colleagues, they have a professional photo. And when I say professional photo, I don't mean that you need to go spend a ton of money, but having that sort of aesthetic. So don't pick a photo where you're like cropping your friend out because you liked how you looked on vacation. It may be a nice picture, but you would stand out in the applications, but not necessarily for a good thing, So like, just try to standardize it. And then lastly, definitely like proofread. Yeah, and I think that's my last slide, and I'd like to open it up to the panel and for any questions. Okay, so maybe what would be good, it's like, why don't I go around to the panel and have each member just give, just a pearl, something that they remember, like as those who interview applicants from their own experiences.
Dr. Paul?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Brown-Talaska, chair of the NYACC DEI task force. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for leading this programming session. There is a question in the chat box from, I believe, one of our doctors on the line, Dr. Nagardig. Hi there, I see you on video, about contributing remotely in research. And now there's a lot of interstate, international collaboration. That was one of the boons post-COVID, where we were able to digitally transform our relationships as it pertains to research. So how can folks contribute remotely in research and make it meaningful and then reflect that in their CV? And if anyone has experience doing this successfully, please share.
Oh, I guess I'll say, this is Larry Phillips. I think when talking about remote research, because so much of it, to your point, does not have to be done on site. The first is the connection. If it's folks that are within the health system that you're in, it's much easier because you have all the access to EMR and all the resources already. So in that way, doing remotely is just coming up with a collaboration with the mentor that you're working with. When you're thinking about more broadly, say you have an area of expertise or area of interest that that you have to connect with a mentor somewhere else. That's really the connection is the first part. It's reaching out, either using somebody who knows both of you to vouch for the work you're doing, or even sometimes just reaching out to folks to get connected. But the first part is making that initial introduction, getting the connection, seeing if there's a way to collaborate. As far as translating that into how you reference in your CV, I'd reference it the same way as I do any other research. Make sure you include who's mentoring you through the research, what has come of the research, the publications get listed the same way.
And then just another thing to add, Actually, the professional societies, especially in cardiology, they do have programs where they can match like trainees with mentors at other institutions. And so like I think ACC has one. I'm not sure about AHA, Association of Black Cardiologists have one. And
Did you eat all the pasta, right?
sorry, can you please mute yourself? Thanks. That's Shodan, please.
Shodan, yes, I sent a direct message. Sorry, Dr. Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying is, so ACC, Association of Black Cardiology, AHA, and also like Women as One, which is not necessarily like a professional org, but it's an org to connect women in cardiology. And I think Dr. Roxana Moran for Sinai is one of the founders. They all have these sorts of like programs connecting people from different institutions. So that's another pathway you can consider as well.
Can I also add something to that? Totally agree with previous speakers. In addition, with research, I know it's very difficult when you're in residency to get on the research or complete it, because some research projects actually take longer than even residency duration. So, but it's very important if you participate in any research project, but you know, maybe the publication is not out yet, or you're still in this at the time when you're doing data collection, when you're applying. So you can still include it in your CV. It's an ongoing research project. Just mention where, at which step of the research project you are. Is it you're doing data collection, or you already have data, you're in the process of analyzing, or you already analyzed it and you submitted it, but you don't have it presented anywhere. So you can put that you in the process of manuscript writing, or you submit it and awaiting results. So you still can list it in your under your research section. It doesn't have to be already published or presented. I want to say, like I see that Anish is here, that we worked on one of the projects that I know that was only presented but was not published. So it's okay. It doesn't have to be published official publication. So if you participate, and make sure you mention that.
We have a pivot to another question on how folks could.
Maybe we can table that one for the end, and let's back on CV. So I'm just going to go around to the panelists. So maybe starting with Dr. Krishnan, because he's on my screen. Any clinical pearls? Well, not clinical, pearls of wisdom for CV.
I mean, I think the thing I just wanted to emphasize, what you said, but it bears repeating. It's just how easy it can be to actually, forget to include things, especially when you're coming back. I haven't looked at this in a year. And that only gets harder, I think, as you progress and you're doing more things, but it still happens a lot when you're early in your career. And so anything you do, like Dr. Paul said, anything you participate in, even if you're not sure, it's something that you want to include, make a note, put it down. Like you said, you can always take it off, but it's very hard in my personal experience to go back and what was it that I did in October of 2023? I know I participated in this, or I gave this talk, big or small. So anything you do, updating on a weekly basis, it can only help you in the long run. I think that's the thing I've learned more than anything.
Anyone else on the panel want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I completely agree with what you said, Dr. Paul, Dr. Krishnan. So definitely, especially as early career, I was told pretty early on, if you're starting a new conference or you've created a new curriculum for trainees, we don't think about it because we're doing it as a part of our job, but remember to go back and update your CV. But I'll also say, as someone that spends a lot of time in medical education and reviews thousands of applications every year of people applying to cardiology fellowship, I think people tend to fall in one of two buckets. One is I think it's reflective of their personality. You either tend to undervalue everything that you've done, and so you actually haven't put on your CV all of your accomplishments, or there's a lot of bloat in there and people have, tend to oversell what they have done. And for anyone that has looked at thousands of applications or CVs, and this is, more so for the trainees out there, I highly recommend sit down with a mentor or sit down with a peer that knows your work, that you trust, and go over your CV before you send in your application, because it's very easy to tell over the course of an interview how much of that is real, genuine, hard work, or if you're the kind of person that actually hasn't advocated for yourself and hasn't put all of your work in there. It's pretty easy to tell over the course of an interview which bucket you fall in. So I would say trying to maintain that balance between the two, where you truly represent yourself accurately on paper. I think that's something that everyone should strive to do.
You know, a couple of comments were made about the frequency of updating. I think the other side of it is closing the loop on some of the things. So for example, if you have a position on a committee and it's an active position when you wrote your CV, and then 3 years later, it looks like you still have that position, but you stopped 2 years ago, just means that you're not keeping it updated. So when you look to update, it's not just adding new things, but it's also closing the loop on things that you've done. Sometimes, for example, publications that are in press, I'll see somebody's CV 3 years later and it still says in press. It just means that they're not looking at it. And some of it's hard to do yourself. I think several people made comments about having somebody look at your CV. I think that's really important as you're updating it, to have just another set of eyes that aren't tunnel vision the way that you're going to be from knowing and living it.
Yeah, I also would like to add, in addition, I mean, totally agree with all the previous points. One also important thing, don't forget to add quality improvement initiatives or any participation in quality improvement programs. I know there is a lot of emphasis of research, but again, it's not necessary like you have to do research. Even if you do like meaningful quality improvement activity within your hospital where there is no research available, but this actually can make significant impact. So if you're a member of the teams that doing that program, or even you initiated any part you participated, so it's a great kind of aspect to mention.
Great. And I see a question in chat. So the question is, do you think it is a good idea to mention non-medicine related work, like sports or hobbies?
I can add to that. I think it's definitely a great idea. First of all, it gets you to more personal, relatable level. Obviously, you don't want to put too much, but mention 2 or 3 that most meaningful to you. And this will, if you during interview, obviously some interviewers can relate to you on that. Like, we had people who connected on interest on like sports cars, or I mean, obviously it was not me, it's usually guys, but or I mean, there are different, so it depends on like who interviewing you, you definitely can get connected with on that level. And it's important to highlight your personal uniqueness as well.
Yeah, like definitely, like when I've interviewed for fellowship, sometimes I would see the hobbies and I'm like, oh, wow, this is really unique. And it would be interests that I had. And so we talk about that. One thing to add about, as we're talking about like the non-medicine stuff, on ERAS, they ask you which languages you speak. Be very honest about that, because if you say you speak a language, you're not really conversant in that language, that interviewer may try to conduct the interview in that language. Like I know when I was interviewing for fellowship, I wrote intermediate Spanish, which I am, and I'm fairly conversant in it. And somebody started to interview me in Spanish, and I was comfortable with it, and that's fine, but that can happen. So just FYI.
Those are facts. My Cornell fellowship interview, one of the interviewers interviewed me in French because they saw that on my CV. I walked in and it was a panel interview, right? So not only was the pressure on because my brain had to mode switch to another language, but it was in front of 3 other people because there was a panel of, I think, 4 people in the room and 3 other people who didn't know what was happening, but I'm in the chair in front of a firing squad and the person starts talking in French, so it happens. So Dr. Paul is absolutely correct. Be honest about your level of proficiency in anything, right? I was a shot put, Division A, pre-Olympic state champion, are you? Well, we can Google stuff nowadays. And like, were you? So just everything matters when it's memorialized on paper and can always be fact checked and cross checked and interrogated in whatever way that people deem necessary to sort of vet your authenticity.
Yeah, I like including hobbies and activities. I think that's a great conversation starter. I think what I'd say is just have it separate from your academics. You know, so like clubs and organizations you're involved in, it shouldn't be really in the body of your CV. That's more at the tail end of your CV.
So I have a question in the chat. So a question regarding volunteer activities. Should we list all of the volunteer activities that we were a part of, or should we only mention the volunteer activities that are cardiology related activities for fellowship application?
So I'll start and say, just piggyback what I just said, meaningful volunteer activities are great to include. Doesn't matter if they're cardiology or not cardiology, but I think it's, again, your whole CV is painting a picture of you. So if you were running a volunteer group, right, that's great. If you want to have a conversation in some of your interviews about a volunteer thing you did, then you include it. If it's that you went to an event somewhere that was a volunteer fundraiser, that's probably not what you're putting there, right? So meaningful activities that help paint a picture of who you are.
Anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, just to, I agree with what Dr. Phillips said. So meaningful, I think, is the key. Also, a lot of people tend to put down sort of a laundry list of every volunteer activity or every, club that they've been a part of. I don't know if that's particularly helpful. If there's one or two that you want to actually talk about during your interview, I would list those because at this point, of course, this is all sort of in addition to the meat of your CV, which is your academic accomplishments. So I would just refrain from, just listing a number of those because you're trying to include the length of your CV. I think, like Dr. Phillips said, meaningful is key.
Go to the next question. What are your thoughts on keeping your CV updated through tools such as Doximity or LinkedIn? Do you think this helps? I mean, I'll take a stab at this one. I guess I'm still old fashioned. I keep a CV in a Microsoft Word document. So it's like, I've never used I have a LinkedIn. And I mean, it has like key points, but I haven't used, I don't know if LinkedIn has a specific feature just for CVs. And I haven't, I have a Doximity profile, but I haven't used it like specifically for a CV. I don't know if anyone has experience with this.
No, same. I have a LinkedIn profile. It doesn't list my entire CV and I update my Word document.
And one suggestion also about updating the document, it would be good to again, like to do it either every 3 months or every 6 months, because it's so easy to forget. In our institution, we required actually every 6 months send, for the newsletter, like our update. So this helps me. Otherwise, I don't know if anybody else have any different ways to keep up, because it's so easy to forget. Yeah, if you don't keep updating.
Okay. Let me go to the next question. Should we have different CVs for academic versus less academic jobs post-fellowship? That's a really good question. I'd like to take a stab at that.
So it's interesting. I think that early on you talked about CV versus resume. And maybe I think we might have some different answers on the panel on this. I think that your CV should really be your CV, that it's going to have all of the information together. Where I see the difference is how you tell the story a little bit. So, for example, you're going to want to standardize your CV in one way or the other. Either you're going to have the training program you're at or the institution that you're at has a standard that they expect everyone to use, then I would use that format. If they don't, you just want to make sure you have a clean, clear format that you're using. Beyond that, I think there are opportunities to focus on certain areas. Sometimes bolding certain things that are active or that you want more focused. Because remember, if you have a CV that's a couple pages or even longer, after a while, if you're looking at these, you kind of they get rote. You're not seeing things anymore. And so you want to use that as a way to focus the reader on what they're looking at. So that might be an area where I would change it for academic or less academic. Where I find that if you're on the job search, that partnering your CV with your cover letter ends up being really important. And the cover letter, I find, is what tells the story of who you want to become, right? The CV says who you are and what you've done to get there. The cover letter is saying who you want to be next. And so the job application should have a different cover letter based on the type of job you're applying for. But I find the CV ends up being pretty standard as telling your past.
Anyone else? Dr. Krishnan, Dr. Ranjan?
No, I think I agree with that completely. I think the backbone is usually the same. And then if there is something really specific about a certain job, yeah, usually I think the cover letter, or at least something, maybe a section to really emphasize how you match with that specific job. But generally speaking, I don't think you need to think about really different CVs for different positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think the cover letter sort of tells your future employer what you're looking for, and then I would rely on the interview when you're having that conversation with them to really indicate what is important to you. I would also say this applies to an extent to trainees applying for fellowship positions as well. It is a good idea to tailor, your application a little bit more towards if there's a program you're interested in. But a lot of, what we're trying to figure out in an interview is, whether or not you're going to be a strong cardiology fellow and what your future interests. I think a lot of that will come across in an interview as well. So I think the overall structure would stay the same regardless.
Dr. Lyubarova, anything else? Or
I mean, I don't have anything addition to add. I totally agree. I mean, the cover letter probably is like kind of narrative summary in highlighting particular interest, and this can be different for academic versus non-academic.
yeah, great. Yeah, I totally agree. Any other questions?
Actually, I had a question, just wondering perspective on things. The traditional CV or some of the resumes would have all this demographic stuff at the top, right? It would be like your name, then your address, your phone number, your email, your marital status, kids, all that kind of stuff. In this world now where so much gets posted online afterwards, like you could Google someone's CV and get it. I'm just curious how people approach personal information on their CVs. Do they include it? Do they not include it? Mine's been more traditional, where I kind of just copy what the institution says to put in there, and it does have some personal information, like my cell phone number is on there. And if that got posted somewhere, that would mean that anyone would have it. How do you approach it, or what recommendations do you give people?
I limit my personal information on it. I have my office address. I have my email address on it. I don't have my cell phone number on it.
I might have to update my CV.
I mean,
Well,
my
see,
first
that's
CV.
it's interesting, right? Because at the institution where I used to work, it was required as part of the institutional CV format. So I guess to speak to the versions of CV points is that you could have an institutional version, right? Because that shouldn't be disseminated. That's for academic promotion and keeping up with credentialing, et cetera, that have those required points. And then you clean it up and pare it down when you're sending it outside of your institution.
Yeah, I think it also depends like where that CV is going, because you're right. Like you can Google certain people and you can click a button and their whole CV will come up. That I would limit. But I would say on any sort of like CV related document, you should at least have an email address, because I've definitely heard stories from friends where they got in a CV and it just says the person's name and their city and there's no contact information because like people have like edited down a little too much. So yeah, so beware of that. Udhay?
I will say
yeah,
along those lines. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. For the CVs, yeah, that I send, to within the institution, and even ones that I'll send to other, academic programs as part of engagements or talks will have my email, and I do put my cell phone on it, thinking that it's usually okay if I'm, but I don't know. Maybe the cell phone I should take off, but yeah, I don't have anything more than that.
The email, the other thing is, if we're talking a lot about applying for fellowship or applying for first job, I'll say if you're going to apply for a new job, change your email to a personal email, or not even personal, it could be a work email, but not the work email. Meaning, if you're at institution A and you're interviewing to leave and they don't know you're leaving, don't put your institution A email address on your CV or any of your correspondence, right? As much as we feel like we own all of our information, we really don't. And so just keep that separation a little bit. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And then also to remember, like sometimes with academic jobs, like you may send a CV and it may not go anywhere for those 6 months. Things change at your current job. You're not looking anymore. But who knows, like a year from now, they may have a new position that you'd be a great fit for and they want to reach out to you. And let's say you went somewhere else, they won't have a way to contact you if you're using your old institution's email. So always have an email that follows you throughout your career. And that can definitely, like your own like personal work email. Like I have one of those that it's my email on Gmail and it's mostly just work related stuff. Any other questions from the attendees? I have a question for the panel. So, with the ERAS, like, yeah, you're showing a professional headshot, but like, what do you think about for like fellows who are applying for their first job? Does it make sense to include like a picture on their CV? Like, I've seen that sometimes. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I was muted. I probably, in general, I wouldn't. I think that the job application, I would just keep it as a document without images. And then, yeah, I probably in general, and most of the ones I've seen, I haven't seen the picture as part. It runs the risk of making it either A, look a little more informal, or B, more of as an outlier of what's typically seen. And so I think I would keep it off. I'm interested to see different opinions.
I agree. I've actually never seen anyone do that outside of ERAS and outside of fellowship applications. So yeah, I personally wouldn't do it. And I agree, it probably would make it look a little informal.
And then speaking of like apply, so I know we're talking also applying to fellowship, but now I'm kind of transitioning to applying for your first job because there are some fellows I feel like on the call. What do you think about like, let's say, like, like New England Journal of Medicine, AHA, even ACC, like they have these like job boards, and I think you can apply through them for positions. Like, have you seen people do that, or would you like recommend best practice for someone to maybe like reach out either to like the chair via an email? Like, what would your advice be for someone who has their CV, creating their cover letter, currently looking for jobs? How do they learn like what's available at the different institutions around them?
I feel like two things. One is definitely use NEJM careers, ACC careers, look for the job postings there, and they usually have a recruiter email. And I would say go ahead and email the recruiter. I don't know how much success people have with necessarily directly emailing chairs that they don't have a prior connection to. I also think chairs get a million emails, in a day. It's really hard for them to track all of that. So I would use those respective career centers. The other website I think has a lot of fellows told me has been helpful to them is Practice Link, where again you can directly send your CV and cover letter through the website. And lastly, I would say word of mouth. So if your mentors, peers, people that you know at other institutions have let you know that they're looking for a position, then a lot of times having someone make an introduction to the chair, that goes a long way instead of directly, emailing multiple chairs. Again, I personally don't know if people have had a lot of success with that, but it's not what I tell my fellows to do.
I agree also with word of mouth. If you know some personally, like not necessary chair, like anybody, like in any position, it's always useful to send email and say, hey, I'm applying for this position. Let me know if anything available, because sometimes there may be no opening per se, but if they know there is a good candidate and you know this person personally and you can, that person will speak for you, they actually can make a position. So yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt to reach out personally. I would like also to add something. We were talking about putting too much personal information. I remember I was applying, and I don't know if there are any women there on the call. I had a child at that time. I did not know should I put that I have a child on my CV or not. And so, I mean, again, you don't want to, obviously, you always want to be honest and open during interview, obviously disclose everything. But on CV, you don't always have to mention all those details. So this is my suggestion. I remember I put that I had a child, and then some people would ask me weird questions about that. So I was like, so just from personal experience. So yeah, obviously be open during the interview. When they already invite you, you can be open about your family and everything. So, but on CV, you don't have to put those details about your, marital status or having children. So.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it kind of comes back to that theme that has been ongoing through this conversation. Like, anything you put on that CV is fair game to be asked about. So if it's your marital status, children, things like that, don't put it on there. And then also, when you go into like interviewing, also understanding that sometimes like certain questions, if you consider it to be invasive, you could politely like sidestep and be like, I prefer not to talk about that, or that's a bit personal or whatnot. Because things that you shouldn't be asked on an interview, like, are you planning to have children? Like that's not a question that should be asked. That's illegal. So just FYI. Yeah. So
It has been asked though.
Yeah.
So,
it has been
so
asked.
learning the art of
Unfortunately.
politely sidestepping is something you should practice, because you will be asked, unfortunately, you will be asked inappropriate and disallowed questions. So something that one of my mentors instructed me to do, which was very helpful, go in front of the mirror and practice how you are going to say something, right? That might be construed as controversial or, avoidant. Things about children, marital status, moving, elderly parents, financial status, all of those weird topics that you're like, is this appropriate? Should I be answering these questions? Formulate your response ahead of time and practice saying that out loud to the mirror. And the more you do that, the more comfortable it'll come off the tongue, because what you don't want to do is feel under the finger in the interview and start stuttering and flushing, and your catecholamines and your stress, flight or flight kicks in, and you get taken off and put on your back foot.
I totally agree. I mean, cardiology, I think medicine in general, like, yes, it's a formal place, but there's still parts of it that people can be a little unprofessional and doing things that the rest of the job market doesn't do. But asking those sorts of questions, that's never really appropriate. Okay, I think we just have like 1 or 2 minutes left, because I just want to leave some time to just briefly, if Dr. Brown-Talaska has like any sort of announcement about the mentorship program. So any last questions or any last thoughts from the panel before we close out? Right, well, I'll sum up what I've learned today. What I really liked was, really thinking about like having your CV as just a true reflection of like your academic achievement, making sure that you're keeping it up to date, and then thinking about using that cover letter to really like summarize, especially those who are applying for jobs, the key attributes that you have that are particular to that specific job posting. And then also another thing to highlight again is that whatever you write on that CV is fair game. So make sure that you're honest about it, make sure that you can talk about it. And even when you describe like your roles on research projects and whatnot, make sure you can actually talk about it, because like I've been in interviews where people ask folks, like they say like participate in the statistical process or whatnot, and people ask like straight like statistics questions. So if you are not, if you haven't done anything stat wise with that paper, don't put that in the description because that may be asked. Any other last thoughts? Okay, so Dr. Brown, do you want to just briefly talk about, give a plug for the mentorship program? I
Yes,
know we had,
very brief. It has been for about 2 years now. We're reviving it. We revamped it. Dr. Medranda, who may have jumped off to do a case, is spearheading the screening of applications and match process. So there's a career and a content section. So if you're career minded, whether it's research-based, meaning whether bench or clinical research, but that's your jam, sort of an MD, PhD lean, but you don't have to be dual degreed, or interested in that track, but that's the content formulation, or the career where it's mostly clinical practice, whether that's private practice or hospital-based practice or a combination. Those are the two tracks, and you will be matched with a mentor who fits your career goals and aspirations to the best of our ability based on the pool of mentors we have to select from. I believe our partner at ACC, Taylor, has dropped in the link to the group at large for that mentorship program application process. Please, if you're interested and you do not have a current mentor who is assisting you with your career aspirations, again, this is in no way guaranteeing you a job, a residency spot, a fellowship spot, right? But we will do the best that we can to have you on a path of success. If you have questions, I'm going to drop in the chat box our ACC email. It's ask@ny-acc.org, and you can drop us a line for questions you have pertaining to this session or the mentorship program, and I'll hand it back to Dr. Paul.
well, thank you everyone for joining us. This will be recorded, and we'll talk about how we may disseminate this to the members who couldn't attend at this time. But yeah, and once again, and thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for spending their hour with us, really learned a lot. And yes, talk to you soon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.